Everybody. Welcome to Farm Table Foundation's class with Terry Kelzer, the first she's done in a while. It's delightful to see some friendly faces and familiar names on the screen. My name is Mike Scott. I'm the program director at Farm Table Foundation, as many of you know, and Terry is one of our favorite instructors, and it's delightful to have her back. Our mission is to build local food culture, and so, of course, one part of that is to help people remember and learn how to cook from scratch again, if we've forgotten. And of course, other elements of our mission are expressed in ways we try to support the local economy and local farmers, and through our restaurant, where we purchase the majority of our food from about 25 area farmers. So, and really our purpose is to reconnect all of us to healthy land, to local farmers and good food. So welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you here. Many of you probably have learned from Terry before. She's been one of our mainstays throughout since we were founded. She cooked for Head Start for over 20 years. She and her husband kind of homesteaded there in Amory and grew a lot of their own food, including a lot of their own meat. So she gained a lot of appreciation for what Farm Table's mission is all about. So Terry, please jump in and feel free to say more about yourself and get the class going. Thanks, Terry.
I should say we're here on the farm. This is bear season, so if somebody yells bear and everybody runs for the windows, we have a bear, all right? And this could be more exciting than making cakes. We could have a little National Geographic special going on out there. Welcome to everybody. In the words of Julia Child, a party without a cake, just a meeting. Okay? And why do we have cakes for our celebrations? And I say that's because it is the very best and most beautiful of our baking skills all put together. And it's a tradition for cakes to be round. For your special cakes, you want to make a round cake. It means you spent more time. It isn't just a slapdash cake. It is a pan. Sweet throughout here and very expensive for people. So they save sweet for very special events. Okay, today our strawberry cake, I'm just gonna start. I gave you two recipes. One recipe is for a sponge cake and the other recipe is for a genoise. The sponge cake is the more difficult. It has more steps. I don't know if you're very experienced bakers or not so experienced. We're going to start with the hard one because the genoise cake is easier. If you can do everything in the hard one, the easy one is a snap. And then I like to do what's hard. You don't need a class if it's easy. The first thing you want to do when you're making a sponge cake is turn on the oven and get that heat. I just did that. And then the second thing you want to do is prepare your pans. You want to give me that top pan. And today we're using 9-inch pans, which I have sprayed, and then I'll talk about some of these great to have baking products. It's very helpful to line your pans with a parchment. This assures you can get it out of the pan easily. I have sprayed this pan, and then it doesn't hurt if you also give your parchment a little spray. If you were doing a sponge cake without baking powder, a traditional sponge, and I'll get into that later, you would not spray the sides. You would want the cake as it rises up in the pan to hold on to the sides, and that helps give you volume. So we have 3 9-inch pans all prepared. And you want that all ready because when your cake is done, it's gonna go right in the oven. Speed is important. Don't answer the phone, nothing, before the cake gets in the oven. the first thing that we did was take our egg yolks. We divided a dozen eggs, yolks and whites. And they should, it's nice to divide them when they're cold, they divide much easier. And then bring them up to room temperature. And then with the yolks, I added a cup and a half of sugar and put it over a pan of hot water, simmering water. And then stir that till the sugar crystals are dissolved. And then we take the cake, this has all the sugar nicely dissolved, which will save our beating time. And then put it into our stand mixer here. Okay. Yep, this is the fun. You see, it ribbons right onto itself. Now, here's the recipe that I see ever ask you to melt the sugar into the egg whites. What this does, or into the egg yolks, what this does is make this process faster, and it gives you less time of beating the yolks. Take that, and then I need the big bowl. This is our first part of our heat, and then we're going to put it into a big bowl. It's really helpful if you have a mixer like this. I just listened to Jacques Pepin talking about his early days as an apprentice baker. He started when he was 13 years old, and he talks about his first job was to come in very, very early in the morning and was to light all the ovens and light all the mixers. In those early days, all the big stand mixers had like fires below them that you could moderate, and so you wouldn't have to do part on the stove. You would start with your egg whites and egg yolks and sugar, and then you could turn that down or off as you were done with that. So then the next part is our egg yolk and egg whites. We have a dozen egg whites at room temperature. Room temperature is what you want everything to be at. You want a really clean bowl. It's nice if you have two bowls and you don't have to stop and clean out a bowl. And we're going to whip it up till we just have foaminess here. You can see it's getting, I don't know if you can see that, it's foamy. All right. And then when it's foamy, you start to add this. You can here we have stiff. So I think what you probably couldn't hear was to first get the egg whites up to a foam, and then I start adding the sugar. I think in the actual recipe, they have you get it even farther before you add the sugar. I guess we all have different ways of doing it. I always like to get my sugar in as soon as it's foamy, and you want nice stiff peaks. But yet you don't want them to, you can go too far, and you can go too You can beat them not enough, and you can beat them too much. But you want to, I guess it's going to take, if you're not used to doing these, it takes a little practice. But basically, then we're going into our big, caught myself there. You want to first put just a little bit into your yolk mixture. And then we're going to lighten the yolks.
And Terry, I have a couple questions here as well.
Great.
One person wants to know where you get your parchment rounds.
Okay. I get them online. Any baking store would probably have them. I order them. They come in all different sizes. I always like to get the unbleached ones. That's a farm table thing too, is that we like to have everything natural and unbleached. I call these the whole wheat ones. They cost a couple dollars more, but they're worth it, I think. Any cake, there are special stores that are just called Cake Inc. New York Cake is where I bought a whole lot of my cake stuff over the years.
And then someone's curious about the name of the book behind you.
Oh, sure. This is called Swedish Cakes, and it's by a master baker, Jan Head, and it's a really good book. And this is his recipe. This is old school, classic, traditional sponge cake.
Thank you. And then, Terry, one other person says, if I want to make this cake as a slab cake, would the recipe make a full sheet pan that I could cut into thirds?
Probably a half sheet pan. I don't think I'd do a whole sheet pan. Half sheet pan.
But she would be able to cut it into thirds, though, then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think you want a round cake, though, don't you? Look at a round cake. This is the solstice. This is the solstice. We're celebrating the sun. Our cake should be round. At a different time of year. So we're folding it in. It helps to have a spatula that has a scoop in it. We're folding it together, but we're trying not to decrease any of the volume. Now you'll notice we don't have any flour in here yet. A lot of cakes, when you're doing this part, you're all done. So what I'm using today is Bob's Red Mill extra fine unbleached pastry flour. You can also use all-purpose flour. It will turn out. The softer the flour, the softer the cake. All right, now we're to the flour. We have 2 ingredients left, or 3. The original recipe in his book does not call for baking powder. That's why there's a little question mark into baking powder. This cake should turn out just fine if your egg whites are blended and whipped at just the right amount. It should raise for you just real nice. But this is extra insurance baking powder. And we're going to put 2 teaspoons into the flour. I'm going to tell you the difference about baking powders. This is Rumford baking powder. Since I think when I first had my driver's license, I would drive around Minneapolis with my grandma looking for Rumford baking powder because it was the only thing she would allow in the house. Baking powder was invented in 1859 by an English chemist whose wife was allergic to yeast. Up until the 1800s, people were leavening their cakes with yeast. With the use of baking powder and whipped eggs, this was the first example of a really soft cake. And then with baking powder, you didn't have to make the yeast first, which took a couple days. And then because yeast wasn't on the shelves, as it is now either. And then this is really the only baking powder without aluminum. And I always like to stay away from the aluminum, if at all possible. It's just not considered that healthy. The one thing that you have to keep in mind is if you use baking powder without aluminum, it has to go into the oven very quickly. The purpose of the aluminum gives the baking powder a longer last. And so you have a little more time to get it in the oven. Maybe you want to enter the foam first, your cake's not going to fall. And while I talk about that, why I said fall, remind me at the end, I have a whole list of reasons why your cake might fall. So here we have our baking powder, and I'm just going to mix it into the flour. And then we're going to sift. And a sifter, I do have an old-fashioned sifter. It's in the back of the cupboard and I can't reach it. So you just want to sprinkle this over. And then we're just going to fold it in. Again, just moving it quickly. And the reason you want to sift it, a lot of cake flours are real lumpy. This one is extra fine. I probably wouldn't even have to. Especially there's that soft as silk cake flour that is very common in the stores. Is totally bleached to death, bleached, bromated, chemicalized. So I don't recommend it. I like to try to stay to the more natural. King Arthur makes a really nice pastry flour, organic pastry flour. But the softest silk will often have lumps in it. And you don't want lumps because the more you have lumps, the more you have to stir, the more you have the chance of deflating your cake. So it just takes a little patience.
Terry, have you ever tried this with a gluten-free flour?
No. Actually, in this book, he does have a method using potato flour, potato starch. I have not. I have never done any gluten-free cooking. I sort of rebel against it. I'm sorry, people.
And then do you need to alter the recipe for higher altitude areas?
Yeah, yes, you probably do. I know my sister lives in Denver. And I can't remember. Most recipes will give, and actually this book also gives a high altitude. It's varying the baking powder. I think it's one of the things I remember. Gosh, it's been years since I cooked a high altitude cake. But yeah, that information is pretty available. Just trying to keep our volume. Now we're going to make a really interesting move. We haven't put the butter in yet. We're going to add it last, which, and this has been melted and warmed. And what we're going to do is just kind of slide it down the outside, our warm butter. And you say, why in the world do you do that? Because it's warming our batter. And that makes, when you put the cake in the oven, if the batter is a little bit warm, it's not such a shock when you put it in the oven.
Terry, the question about the high altitude baking actually came from your sister. She's participating.
Oh, my sister is.
Yeah.
Sand, you're supposed to have all that information.
It's one of the advantages of Zoom calls. We have people on different time zones.
Oh, cool. I think the cake we made turned out, didn't it, Sister Sand? Okay, our butter it's pretty much all combined. Okay, I'll take my 3 cake pins. I'm reading a book right now called Baking Powder Wars, which is pretty interesting. There were 4 major baking powder companies. Baking powder was like the most amazing thing that was invented in that time period, as before the late 1800s, all food was basically farm to table. After the invention of baking powder, this is where the start of factory to table began. Now we're going to divide our cakes. If you want to be really exact, you can weigh each one. If you're doing, I only usually weigh it if I'm doing cakes for somebody else, and I have to be sure everything is just right. Okay, and we're just gonna level them off here a little bit. Use a little bit more over here.
Terry, while you're doing that, we have a question about the Rumford baking powder too. Is that available in most markets, or is it kind of a specialty market item?
It depends. Sometimes I find it easily, and sometimes I don't.
Okay.
The local markets here, actually our local marketplace foods, if there's people watching right from the Amory area, marketplace foods has it in their organic section. Otherwise, I'm sure you can order it ahead of time.
The bear.
It's not a bear. I don't think so. All right, sorry.
Cool.
It's a raccoon. All right. We are in the 80-acre woods here. All right. So now I'm going to do the fun part. I'm going to say that for baking a really nice cake, you should plan for a couple of days. You want to bake your cakes a day ahead so they're nice and set up to go. If you can also bake them a week ahead, get that out of the way, freeze it, and then take it out the day before. And then the second thing that we want to do is, on that day before, is make our sauces. And then they're all set and cool and ready to go. And I'll explain the sauces as we go through it here. Could you give me those 2 cake plate things? Oh, I have my son and my daughter-in-law helping me here today, which is wonderful. We're going to assemble the cake. And the first thing that you want to do is get your very extra special fancy plate for a fancy cake.
No worries, Terry.
Pardon me?
No worries about the dog.
Yeah, sorry. Raccoons. Oh dear. They try to come in before the bears come. Now here's another thing that is really handy to have when you're baking cakes, are cake cardboards. You almost can't do without them, because when you have to work with a piece of cake like this, it's so easy to break. And if you have a cardboard, what I usually do is drop my cake out of the can onto a cardboard. And then from there, it can go onto the cake plate. But first we do our cake trimming. And you take a nice long knife, and I'm going to just, because I don't want to get my fancy plate all dirty. And what we're going to do is trim the tops of the cake.
Terry, when you bake a day ahead, do you leave the cakes at room temperature or in the fridge?
Room temperature. Actually, fridge would probably tend to dry it out.
Okay. And do you wrap the cakes in
So
saran wrap?
just wrap it really good.
You wrap it in saran wrap
Yeah.
really well if you're going to freeze them, or next day, either way?
Yep.
Okay.
Wrap it really good. Now this is a basic baker's thing, is that you want to trim the first, the brown part off your cake. And here we can see that it's a nice sponge cake because we've got little holes in it. It's really moist. I have, could you push that case? Yeah. These are all my crumbs. You can just toss your crumbs, or you can use your cake crumbs. Among the things you can do with them is you can grind them up in a blender or a food processor and save them with sprinkles on things. You can make cake pops, which are kind of popular. You can roll the crumbs in frosting and put a stick in them, and then dip them in like melted chocolate ganache or something like that, and then let them dry, and there you have cake pops with your cake crumbs. And then I like to say, my son invented the cupcake smoothie. You can also have cake crumb smoothies in the morning. You just throw in your crumbs and your fruit and your whatever you're going to put in your smoothie, and it's supposed to make the most outstanding smoothie that you ever tasted. Now, this is going to be the bottom, so I'm not going to worry about both sides of this one. And I'm going to put it on my plate. That sticks pretty good. A lot of times if you're doing an icing cake or something and you got it on your big plate, one of the worries is that your cake will fall off the plate. So a lot of times I'll just put a layer of icing right under the cake with so it sticks good. You want it to stay on your plate. And then we'll talk about the sauces as I apply them. The first thing is a simple syrup. This is very commonly done. This simple syrup is with equal parts sugar, water, and the juice of 1 lemon. And what we do is we just brush this on the top. This gives extra moisture to the cake and a little flavor with the lemon.
Terry, is that why you cut the top off a little bit too, like so it'll absorb more?
Yep, it will absorb and be moister. Yep. And then another thing with cutting off the top, if you're a little crooked at all, you can level out your cakes that way. And that's our first.
Lynette wants to know if you use cake strips when baking to prevent the tops from doming.
No, if they dome too much, that's usually the oven was too hot, that they rose too fast, or your batter was too cold. They shouldn't dome too much. And yeah, I never use the cake strips. What I would do is just cut off the pointy part. Is there any more questions on? Our next sauce is our vanilla pastry cream. And this is basically simplest recipe in the world. Is I use 2 cups of whole milk, a cup of sugar mixed with 1/3 to 1/4 of a cup of cornstarch. You mix that together, the yolk of 3 eggs, beat those up, everything goes in your milk, mix it up. It'll come up thick in about 5 minutes. Add a little vanilla and a couple tablespoons of butter, and it'll melt and cool down the pastry cream. And so then we're going to put a nice layer of pastry cream. Just like pudding. That's sauce, considered sauce number 2.
Is your pastry cream cold or room temperature, Terry?
It's nice to have it cold. Room temperature is okay. You want to be for sure it's set. I have a bowl of cream in the. We're going to put on our 3rd topping. Okay, and this is mascarpone cream. This is whipped cream that has been stabilized with mascarpone cheese. I don't know how familiar everybody is with mascarpone cheese. It's very much like cream cheese. Cream cheese is made with whole milk. Mascarpone cheese is made with cream. So it's richer, buttery tasting, and it blends really well. When you whip the cream, what I do is in my bowl, I put maybe half of what I'm going to mix in the bowl, and then put the room temperature mascarpone cream into the whipping cream and just let that mix with a wire whip. And then when it starts to seem not lumpy anymore, smooth, add in powdered sugar is what I usually use as a sweetener for my cream, and then bring it up to stiff. You want, I think a lot of people are afraid to whip their cream till it's really stiff. And I know you're almost right on the brink of butter, but don't be afraid, just do it. It'll start to get, you just need it to stay thick, and you need a stabilized cream. So especially for cakes, because they're gonna have to stand for a while. And the trouble with just plain whipped cream is that it has a tendency to separate and melt at the bottom, and that's the last thing we want. A simple thing that you can do with whipped cream that helps is to just, in your whipping cream, when you start it, I usually put the sugar in, and then if it's gonna have to hold, you can add an extra tablespoon of cornstarch. There is cornstarch in powdered sugar, usually a little extra. It just gives it a little more stabilization. And so here we have so we just put that, that's layer number one. And then we're gonna put sliced strawberries here. It is strawberry season. They just started picking today at the patch near us. So regrettably, these are commercial. They're commercial organic, but they're still not the same as the ones you pick yourself. Okay, now we have our, and then this is the third type of sauce that we have, is our strawberry sauce. And what I'm using is my my strawberry freezer jam, which I make every year. Our family sort of needs about 50 jars to get through a year, our extended family. So that makes it easy for me. I've already got these freezer jam in the freezer, and I can take it out, dump it, and then mix it up, make it more of a sauce. If you don't, what you can also do is just take a quart of fresh strawberries and put them in a blender or food processor and blend them up, and then you can just drizzle. It's a little messier, but it tastes just fine. And this is here, you just want to drizzle this strawberry sauce. You can see. Okay, that's layer one. And we're just going to repeat the whole thing. Now these are in the middle cake, so I have them cleaned on each side. And we will first go back and sauce. The cream. We're going to start to go down the sides a little bit here. I'm not using my, so I take this. Very helpful if you have one of these also. I had a metal one and it seized up, so I got out of the habit of using it.
And Terry, we have a question about the recipe included for the strawberry sauce. Is that the same recipe you use for your freezer jam?
No. For the freezer jam, I use the recipe in the box of sugar gel. And the nice thing, freezer jam is so nice because it's just like eating a fresh strawberry. The strawberries are never cooked.
Your freezer jam recipe comes from the box of what, Terry?
Sugar gel,
Sure gel.
right? If you make jam at all, you're pretty familiar with sugar gel. It's pectin. Going 3.
I've got a personal question. Can you go for like 5 layers?
You could. Then it comes to, there's like we're making wedding cakes and things, we kind of start putting sticks in to hold it, because you're really in danger of, I did not set the timer here. I think I better do that. Okay, yeah. So I forgot the question. I just remembered I forgot to set the timer. Oh, could you go 5 layers? You know, if you don't have to move the cake very far, you could try it. But 3 is kind of for one cake, or often then you would have, if you wanted to do 5 layers, what you would do is have the bottom layer 12 inches, 10 inches, 8 inches, and smaller. So then it kind of has something to hold it. It's pretty hard to go much higher than this. And I have a story about a wedding cake that I made one time that we never talked about for years after, but now I feel safe. We had a huge wedding cake, and we had to drive it over to Trollhagen, which is about 7 miles from here. And we had it in the back of the car, and I was sitting with it so that it would get there. And I told my husband he had to go slower because I couldn't hold the cake. I had worked on the cake for all week. The icing, of course, the last day. And about like 100 little flowers that were on it. And needless to say, we got just to the railroad tracks right in front of the place where the wedding was, and the whole cake fell over on its side. And we had to come back home and re-put together the whole cake. And this time my son drove it over at 15 miles an hour, and we got there. My husband wasn't too good at driving directions. He was good at giving them, not too good at taking them.
And Terry, we've got a question about the recipe in the email for strawberry sauce. Is it necessary
Yep.
to have the gelatin?
This is another way you can do it. It isn't necessary. You can just use pulped up strawberries, but gelatin makes it so you could put it in the fridge and you know, you would have some strawberry sauce for a while. For gelatin, I think the recipe calls for a tablespoon of gelatin powder. I also always order this called perfected gel. Comes from Germany. Perfected gel, it's organic, 100% organic. I think with certain things that we use in cooking and baking, for sure in cooking, we always want organic broth, because a lot of times bones store a lot of the bad minerals and things that animals eat. And the same with gelatin is made from hoofs and bones, and so if we can get an organic, it makes it so much more comfortable for me to use, for sure. And this you can order on Amazon. It comes next day. I don't know if you're familiar. It comes in these little sheets, like you can see that, but they're just really thin, and then you just have to dissolve them in some hot water. Or I think the recipe calls for lemon juice, which would work. I guess I got it.
Carrie, if the cake layers are frozen for use next week or something, should you shave the top off before or after freezing?
After freezing, when you bring them to room temperature. While the cake is not yet put together, the one thing about the cake is that the cake top at that point will help keep the moisture, keep your cake moist. So you don't want to, if you take it off and freeze it, your cake could start to dry in the freezer. So now we're going to decorate the tops. You can either use like whole strawberries, make it pretty. Yes. Just be creative. This is the fun thing about cakes. You can use slices too. Okay, so this is pretty simple. Just be creative. Keep on strawberries, whatever you think of at the moment. Also, traditionally, sometimes in Sweden, they put bananas in this cake too, and sometimes passion fruit. Don't know why, but a lot of times they put things together that are a little bit different. Now, we should have a pastry bag. I always think everybody in the world has pastry bags. I came to find out one day that they don't. I brought a cake to, wasn't a cake, it was a croquembouche, into the cities and forgot my decorating tools, and kind of thought, well, I'll just borrow some. Needless to say, I called everybody I knew. So my mother didn't have any. And everybody I called were just like, oh, no, we don't use those. I have a whole drawer of cake decorating stuff. So I wouldn't know how you could be without it.
So how does the frosting hold up in the piping bag?
Now we can start to make it pretty. We can. Did you have a question?
Yeah, how does the frosting hold up in a piping bag?
How does it hold up? You're quick with it. So yeah, it holds. It's doing good. This is a little bit small bag.
And someone also asked if you ever add herbs to the cake or decoration, such as basil.
No, I only, you know, a lot of the modern bakers, they do, they have wonderful ideas of rosemary and basil, and I'm so old school. Sweet is sweet, savory is savory, that's the way I do it. But you could, why not? If you love that with your cake, go for it. It's our time. Okay, well, I'm not gonna do all around, but I'll just show you, you wanna do your finish with your top. Time. You never can finish. There we have a Swedish cake. It's never finished until we do this. Vi har inte en svenska tårta utan lax. Any more questions?
Terry, why is this a cake that was known or still is known to be made around this time of year, around the solstice? Is there something special about it?
Yeah, Midsummer is a time when everybody gets together, and you can put that right there. When everyone gets together and has a very big party. I belong to a Swedish club in Emery, and we, up until this year, every year, the last 8 years, we've had a midsummer party, which it's dancing around the midsummer pole and decorating with flowers, everything. And then besides the decoration and dancing, the next most important thing is the food. And the thing about the food for midsummer is that it is it is of the freshest things of the season. Strawberries are just coming in this time of year, so we celebrate strawberries. Other things on the menu would be the fresh new small garden potatoes, and with dill, cucumbers, and sour cream. Always lots of dairy, always lots of fresh food. Lots of herring also. And yeah, so it's just a great festival celebrating the midnight sun. Sun never sets in Scandinavian countries on midsummer, which will be Saturday. So, any more questions? Do you think this would be a cake you would make?
People are saying it looks beautiful to watch you, and they think, yes, they would make it. Some of us wish you would do delivery, of course.
Actually, I would do it because we do have 2 of these. I did a practice run through with it with just a double layer. So the kids are gonna have to take a cake. Maybe we'll have some cake right after we're done here. The traditional beverage to serve with this cake would be a sparkling wine. Prosecco is, which you would have a glass of this with your cake. Maybe we'll do that too. Maybe you could join us. We sure got a lot of cake to eat.
And someone did ask, is this cake best assembled the day it's to be eaten?
Is it what?
Is it best to assemble it the same day that you eat it, serve it?
Yeah, you wouldn't want to assemble it the day before. Do all the other stuff the day before. And then, because, you know, it's your party day, you want to get to the party, you know, all you want to do is in the morning is assemble the cake. And you have all your stuff ready, and then you just do it.
Great. And then someone also, you also had I'm not sure how to say it actually, the Genoa cake. And
Yes.
is that very different compared to what we just did here?
And the main difference is it's simpler. This is an example of it, and I'll show you the pan. Now that one I make in a springform pan. And here, this is easier in the process. There's only like 2 steps. You do all your egg yolk, sugar, flour, all that together. Then you do your egg whites together, and then you just mix the 2 and into the springform pan. And you get a nice cake like this. And what you do, this is really enough. You can cut this in thirds or in half, horizontal like that. And then decorate it the same. I also really like this recipe, and I do it with a lemon filling and then with cream topping. It's really good too. It's a good recipe. It's one of my old standbys. I learned that from Jim Dodge at the New England Culinary Institute. Actually, he was in Rock Cities, and I took his class, and it's been one of my favorite cakes for 20 years.
Great. Are there any other questions before we wrap it up, folks? Feel free to type in another one. And Terry, please know there are lots of folks saying beautiful cake and thank you. It's a delight to see you, all that sort of thing. And it is nice to see
we have some of our regulars joining
yes,
us. That's nice.
Yes, there's
good to see.
Who miss you. And then
okay, it looks like our cake is done. I'm just gonna test it. It's good to have a cake tester or a toothpick. Yeah. Do you want to take those out? There's hot pans in there.
And do you keep the cake in the refrigerator the day of?
Yes, yes, for sure. This is all melty.
Okay.
And usually your midsummer day, it can be the hottest day of the year. I think last year they were promising us it was going to be 99 degrees or 100. So you want to keep your cake cool right up until the end. Keep it in the fridge until you're going to serve it. I think one thing that we could do is cut and show a slice. Did you see my long knife? And grab that fruit. And here we have this is just a double, but, and my son just opened the bubbly for us, so we are going to have cake and bubbly.
And someone did ask, as we watched you cut the 2-layer, how do you cut the 3-layer without it all falling apart?
Carefully, slowly, but it'll cut. And now I wouldn't cut, I would want this one to set up a little more. And if, put it in the fridge, let it set up, and then cut it. So this one I did this morning, and it's set up quite nicely.
Great. Well, it looks beautiful, and we really appreciate your time tonight, Terry, and Joe and Nubia. Thank you as well.
Yep. Maybe they could get a picture. There's our flutes. Okay, we're going to do it. All right. Yeah, these are my helpers tonight, Nubia, and my son Joe.
Thank you, Nubia and Joe, very much. Looks like you're going to have a good time.
All right.
Enjoy, and to all of those on the call, on the Zoom. We'll be having more classes with Terry. Keep an eye on our website, which is farmtablefoundation.org. And we'll be sending out our emails too to let you know what's coming up. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Terry, we're blessed by your presence. Yep, and thank you for your help, Joe and Nubia. Good night, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.